The story of the Gunpowder Plot is the story of religious turmoil, a plot to kill a king, and an execution so cruel it would keep the victim from heaven. But it doesn't end there. It was a conspiracy that rippled far beyond Westminster, leaving behind not only the executed conspirators but also a trail of hidden victims, men, women, and children whose lives were torn apart by suspicion, persecution, and the heavy hand of royal justice. Their suffering forms an essential but often overlooked chapter in the story of early Stuart England, a nation in which faith was political, loyalty was measured in worship, and suspicion could destroy a family overnight. In 1605, England was a nation simmering with religious tension and political uncertainty. After decades of persecution under Elizabeth I, English Catholics had pinned their hopes on the new king, James I. The son of the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, James had long seemed a potential friend to their cause. Many imagined he would end the punitive laws that had forced them to worship in secret, to pay heavy recusancy fines, and to risk imprisonment for attending Mass. Yet those hopes were cruelly disappointed. James I proved pragmatic, not lenient. To consolidate his throne and placate the Protestant establishment, he reaffirmed restrictions on Catholic worship, reimposed fines, and ensured that loyalty to the Church of England remained the mark of a true subject. For a desperate few, the only answer seemed to be revolution, a divine act of fire and vengeance. Led by Robert Catesby, a charismatic and fervent English Catholic gentleman, a small band of conspirators conceived a daring plan: to blow up the Houses of Parliament on the 5th of November 1605, killing the king, his ministers, and the entire political elite. In the chaos that followed, they would incite an uprising in the Midlands and install James's young daughter, Princess Elizabeth, as a puppet monarch under a restored Catholic regime. The plan was audacious, almost theatrical in scope. For months, the conspirators secretly rented cellars beneath Parliament, transported barrels of gunpowder by night, and coordinated their scheme across several counties. It might have worked, had not a mysterious warning letter reached the Catholic peer Lord Monteagle, days before the opening of Parliament. Acting on the tip, officials searched the Undercrofts and discovered Guy Fawkes guarding the barrels late on the night of the 4th of November. The arrest sent shockwaves across the realm. Within days, the conspirators were hunted down. Catesby and several others shot dead at Holbeach House in Staffordshire, the rest captured and dragged to London in chains. By January 1606, the surviving plotters were executed in scenes of theatrical brutality, hanged, drawn, and quartered before jeering crowds. The government proclaimed England's deliverance as an act of divine providence. Parliament decreed that the 5th of November should be kept as a day of thanksgiving, the origin of Bonfire Night. But the story did not end there. In many ways, the real tragedy was only beginning. The men who plotted the destruction of Parliament were not isolated zealots. They were sons, husbands, fathers, and brothers whose downfall dragged their households into ruin. When they fell, their families bore the full weight of the state's vengeance. Take the case of Anne Vaux, a woman of intelligence, courage, and deep faith, closely associated with the Jesuit priest Henry Garnet. Though she had no part in the conspiracy, her close friendship with Garnet, who was accused of knowing about the plot through confession, placed her under intense suspicion. She was imprisoned in the Tower of London and interrogated repeatedly. Her family's estates were seized, her reputation shattered, and her life forever shadowed by her faith. Like many recusant women of her generation, Anne Vaux became collateral damage in a war she never fought. The Catesby family, too, paid dearly. Robert Catesby, the plot's ringleader, was killed in a final stand, shot through the body as he clutched an image of the Virgin Mary. His death was swift. The punishment that followed was not. His family's lands were confiscated, their wealth forfeited, and their name blackened in perpetuity. The same was true for the families of Thomas Percy, Thomas Winter, and others. Estates were seized, wives and children ostracized, servants interrogated, and loyal tenants forced into exile. For these families, the Gunpowder Plot was not merely a failed rebellion. It was the erasure of their futures. The Crown's vengeance was bureaucratic as well as bloody, a machinery of confiscations and fines designed to annihilate the social standing of those tainted by Catholic sympathy. Nor were the women of these households passive observers. Many endured imprisonment or lifelong suspicion. Some, like Lady Digby, the wife of conspirator Sir Everard Digby, pleaded for mercy, only to be met with silence. Others were forced to convert publicly to Anglicanism to save their children from destitution. The Gunpowder Plot's fallout reached into drawing rooms and chapels, into the lives of the innocent as well as the guilty. If the families of the conspirators suffered materially, the broader Catholic population endured spiritually, socially, and politically. The failure of the plot brought upon them a storm of hatred and repression, unparalleled in its intensity. In the months after the discovery, Parliament introduced new penal laws. Recusants, those who refused to attend Anglican services, faced increased fines, imprisonment, and the confiscation of property. The Oath of Allegiance demanded that Catholics renounce the Pope's authority, a requirement that placed them in an impossible moral position. To take the oath was to deny the head of their church. To refuse it was to court suspicion and ruin. The anti-Catholic hysteria that followed was not merely political, it was cultural. Plays and pamphlets painted Catholics as assassins in disguise. Ballads mocked the Virgin Mary and the Mass. Bonfire sermons depicted the Pope as the Antichrist and Guy Fawkes as his servant. Catholics were hounded from offices, barred from education, and treated as second-class citizens. Even children were forced to participate in annual commemorations denouncing their own faith. In villages and towns, ordinary recusant families endured house searches, surveillance, and betrayal by neighbours. The act of hosting a priest could mean execution. Priests themselves were hunted as criminals, hiding in secret chambers or priest holes, built into manor walls and chimneys. The Jesuit Nicholas Owen, who engineered many such hiding places, was captured and tortured to death in 1606. His martyrdom exemplified the hidden cost of England's post-plot paranoia. The Gunpowder Plot thus became not just a failed conspiracy, but a justification, a political myth that solidified England's Protestant identity. The annual celebrations of deliverance with their sermons and bonfires were more than Thanksgiving. They were instruments of propaganda. To remember November 5th was to reaffirm England's destiny as a Protestant nation, purified by fire from Rome's corruption. Each spark of the bonfire lit up the chasm that now separated Catholics from the national community. Among those most cruelly caught in the aftermath was Father Henry Garnet, the Jesuit superior in England. Garnet's role in the story was complex but profoundly tragic. He had learned of the plot only indirectly, through the confessional, a sacred seal he was bound never to break. Far from encouraging violence, he had urged moderation and peace. Yet the government, eager for a symbolic scapegoat, cast him as the sinister mastermind of the entire affair. After his arrest, Garnet endured months of interrogation in the Tower. Despite torture, he maintained his innocence. His trial in March 1606 was a spectacle designed to fuse Catholicism with treason in the public imagination. The prosecution invoked the image of the Jesuit as the invisible hand behind all subversion, a myth that would persist for centuries. Garnet was convicted and executed, his head displayed on London Bridge as a warning. But among Catholics, he was revered as a martyr. The Jesuit order itself was forever stained in English eyes. Their missions, once purely pastoral, were now framed as espionage. To harbour a Jesuit was to risk one's life. In the English popular imagination, Jesuit became synonymous with conspiracy. The Gunpowder Plot thus reshaped not only policy, but perception, feeding the deep vein of anti-Catholic paranoia that would erupt again in the Popish plot of the 1670s and the Gordon riots of the 1780s. The hysteria did not stop with Catholics. Even Protestants felt its effects. Local magistrates and sheriffs who had failed to detect the plot earlier were censured for negligence. Neighbours accused neighbours of sympathy or betrayal. The machinery of suspicion devoured the innocent as readily as the guilty. The government's triumphalist narrative of deliverance, that divine providence had saved the realm, justified an unprecedented expansion of surveillance and control. Spies were employed to monitor not only recusants, but also Puritans, whose demands for reform unsettled the state church. The Gunpowder Plot, intended to destroy Parliament, paradoxically strengthened the Crown's authority and the machinery of repression that would later be turned against other religious dissenters. Thus, the paranoia born in 1605 lingered across the century, shaping England's political culture long after the conspirators' bodies had turned to dust. The legacy of the Gunpowder Plot extended far beyond the 17th century. For generations, the story of Guy Fawkes was retold from pulpits and classrooms, reinforcing a moral of Protestant virtue and Catholic villainy. The annual bonfires and effigies of Fawkes became rituals of unity, or more precisely, of exclusion. Children learned to fear popery long before they understood what it meant. The image of the traitor beneath Parliament became a cornerstone of England's self-image, vigilant, providentially protected, and eternally Protestant. Yet beneath the fireworks and festivities lay a darker truth. The very act of celebration masked the suffering of those whose lives were destroyed by the state's vengeance. Every burned effigy of Fawkes was a reminder of the real men hanged and quartered, and the countless others ruined by association. The Gunpowder Plot's memory was sanitized into myth, its human cost obscured by time. It would take centuries for the wounds to fade. Not until the late 18th and early 19th centuries were many of the anti-Catholic laws repealed. By then, the real victims, the widows, the children, the recusant faithful, had long vanished from history's stage. History often remembers the dramatic moment and the famous name, Guy Fawkes, the barrels of gunpowder, the midnight arrest. But beneath the legend lies a tapestry of human suffering that deserves remembrance. The Gunpowder Plot was not simply a failed act of terrorism, it was a national trauma that reshaped English identity, deepened religious divisions, and left countless innocents in its wake. To tell the story of the Gunpowder Plot fully is to acknowledge its hidden victims, those who paid the price for other men's fanaticism. They remind us that the consequences of zealotry, whether religious, political, or ideological, rarely end with the conspirators themselves. They fall most heavily upon those who never chose to fight at all.